On the morning of August 10th, 2019, guards at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City entered cell 318 on the Special Housing Unit and found Jeffrey Epstein unresponsive, hanging from his bunk with a bedsheet around his neck. Within hours, the medical examiner pronounced him dead. Within days, the most powerful men in the world exhaled. Epstein was not an ordinary inmate. He was a man who had spent decades collecting the secrets of presidents, princes, prime ministers, and billionaires, secrets that were scheduled to come out in open court. He died before a single one of them did. The official ruling was suicide. But the list of things that went wrong that night, the broken cameras, the sleeping guards, the removed cellmate, the irregular checks, the injuries that forensic experts said did not match a hanging, was not a list of coincidences. It was a list of questions that have never been answered. To understand what happened inside cell 318, you first have to understand who Jeffrey Epstein really was, because the man who died in that cell was not simply a convicted sex offender. He was the center of a network so powerful, so connected, and so carefully protected that even after his arrest, the system struggled to contain what he represented. If you want the real stories, fully documented, nothing held back, subscribe right now. This one goes all the way to the top. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. Saying he grew up in a modest working-class household in Seagate, a gated community on the edge of Coney Island, the son of a Parks Department employee. Nothing about his origin suggested what he would become. That was always part of how he operated. Epstein was intellectually exceptional from childhood, skipping 2 grades, enrolling at Cooper Union at 16, and later attending New York University. He never completed his degree, but secured a teaching position at the Dalton School in Manhattan in the mid-1970s, teaching mathematics and physics to the children of Manhattan's elite. This is where the connections began. Through Dalton, Epstein met Alan Greenberg, the head of Bear Stearns. Greenberg hired him as a low-level financial assistant, despite having no degree and no formal financial training. Within 4 years, Epstein had become a limited partner at one of the most powerful investment banks in America. How a Brooklyn kid with no degree climbed that fast in that world is a question that was never fully answered during his lifetime. In 1981, Epstein left Bear Stearns under circumstances that were never made fully public. He then established his own financial management firm, J. Epstein and Company, which he claimed managed money exclusively for clients with assets over $1 billion. He named only one client publicly, Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret. Where the rest of his money came from was never established in any court proceeding. Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, Epstein built a social network that operated at the absolute highest levels of global power. But his contact list, later obtained by investigators, included Prince Andrew of the British royal family, former President Bill Clinton, President Donald Trump, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and hundreds of other figures from finance, politics, science, and entertainment. He maintained a property portfolio that served as both the infrastructure and the evidence of his crimes. A mansion on East 71st Street in Manhattan, one of the largest private residences in New York City. A private island in the United States Virgin Islands, called Little St. James, referred to by locals as Pedophile Island. A ranch in New Mexico, a Paris apartment, and a private Boeing 727, logged in flight records as carrying many of his most powerful associates to many of these locations. The core of Epstein's crimes was a systematic and long-running sexual abuse and trafficking operation involving underage girls. He and his associates, most prominently Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of British media mogul Robert Maxwell, recruited vulnerable young women and girls, many from disadvantaged backgrounds, with promises of money, opportunity, and connection to powerful people. What happened to them after that recruitment is documented in hundreds of pages of victim testimony. The first time the system caught Epstein was in 2005, when Palm Beach police began investigating complaints from the parents of young girls. The investigation produced enough evidence for serious federal charges. What happened next became one of the most controversial prosecutions in American legal history. Alexander Acosta, the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, negotiated a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein's legal team that gave him immunity from federal prosecution, required him to plead guilty to two minor state charges, serve 13 months in county jail with work release 6 days a week, and register as a sex offender. The deal was structured in a way that also granted immunity to unnamed co-conspirators, a provision so unusual that legal experts described it as almost without precedent. The victims were not informed of the agreement before it was finalized, a direct violation of the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Acosta later became Secretary of Labor under President Trump and resigned from that position in July 2019. The same month, Epstein was arrested again. For a decade after the 2008 deal, Epstein lived largely as a free man. He traveled internationally. He continued hosting powerful figures at his properties. He maintained his social network. The women he had abused filed civil suits. Journalists investigated. Miami Herald reporter Julie K. Brown published a devastating investigative series in November 2018 that reopened public and prosecutorial attention to the case. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey as his private jet landed from Paris. He was charged with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York described a years-long scheme involving the sexual abuse of dozens of underage girls. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 45 years in federal prison. More critically, a full trial would have required the disclosure of the names of every associate, every co-conspirator, and every participant his victims could identify. That list was what made Jeffrey Epstein the most dangerous man in American custody. Think about that. A full trial would have exposed names at the highest levels of global power. Comment below. Do you believe what happened next was suicide? Epstein was taken to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, a federal detention facility known among inmates and corrections staff as one of the most deteriorated federal facilities in the country. Overcrowded, understaffed, with aging infrastructure and a documented history of operational failures. And this was where the federal government chose to house its most high-profile and most dangerous to the powerful inmate. On July 23, 2019, 17 days after his arrest, Epstein was found in his cell semi-conscious, with marks on his neck. His cellmate at the time was Nicholas Tartaglione, a former police officer awaiting trial for 4 murders. Tartaglione later denied harming Epstein and claimed he found him injured and called for help. The incident was recorded as either a suicide attempt or an assault. Epstein was placed on suicide watch. After 6 days on suicide watch, Epstein was removed from that status on July 29th. The decision to remove him was made by the MCC psychology staff. After removal from suicide watch protocol required that he be housed with a cellmate and checked by guards every 30 minutes around the clock. Now, both of these requirements were about to be violated simultaneously on the most critical night of his detention. On August 9th, Epstein's cellmate, Tartaglione, was transferred out of cell 318. Epstein was left alone. This was a direct violation of the post-suicide watch protocol requiring a cellmate. The reason for the transfer and who authorized it has never been publicly explained. That same night, both guards assigned to the Special Housing Unit tier, where Epstein was housed, were not conducting their required checks. One guard was working a 5th consecutive overtime shift. The other was working mandatory overtime and was not a regular SHU officer. Between approximately 10:30 p.m. on August 9th and 6:30 a.m. on August 10th, Jeffrey Epstein was not checked on a single time. No, the required 30-minute checks, mandated by federal protocol for any inmate recently removed from suicide watch, were falsified in the logbook. Guards Tova Knoll and Michael Thomas later admitted in court that they had been sleeping and browsing the internet during the hours Epstein died. Both were charged with falsifying prison records. The charges were later dropped. The cameras. This is where the official account becomes most difficult to accept. The surveillance system covering the special housing unit tier outside Epstein's cell malfunctioned that night. The footage that should have captured every movement in that corridor during the hours of his death was unusable. The FBI later confirmed the footage was corrupted. A second camera positioned nearby also failed to capture usable footage. Two cameras, same corridor, same night, and both failed. The medical examiner who conducted Epstein's autopsy was Dr. Barbara Sampson of the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner. Her office ruled the cause of death suicide by hanging. But Dr. Michael Baden, one of the most prominent forensic pathologists in the United States, hired by Epstein's brother Mark to observe the autopsy, publicly disagreed with that conclusion. Baden stated that the pattern of injuries he observed was more consistent with homicidal strangulation than with suicide by hanging. The specific injuries Baden described included fractures to the left and right, thyroid cartilage, and a fracture of the left hyoid bone. The hyoid is a small horseshoe-shaped bone in the neck. In young people, it is flexible and rarely breaks in suicidal hangings. In older people, it breaks more frequently. But Baden and other forensic experts noted that the combination and pattern of fractures in Epstein's case appeared in a higher percentage of homicidal strangulation cases than hanging cases. The official medical examiner stood by her ruling. The disagreement has never been resolved. Within hours of Epstein's death, a pattern emerged that would define every subsequent discussion of the case. Attorney General William Barr stated publicly that he was appalled by the failures at MCC and called for an investigation. The FBI and the Justice Department Inspector General opened inquiries. The warden of MCC was temporarily reassigned. And within days, across every corner of the internet, every news network, in every conversation, the same two words appeared everywhere simultaneously. He was murdered. The list of people with motive to ensure Jeffrey Epstein never testified in open court was not a short list. It included individuals in multiple countries at multiple levels of power who had appeared in his flight logs, his contact books, his property visitor records, and the testimony of his victims. Ghislaine Maxwell, his closest associate and alleged co-conspirator, was still free at the time of his death. She was arrested in July 2020, convicted in December 2021, and is currently serving a 20-year federal prison sentence. She has never publicly named names beyond what was established at trial. The two guards charged with falsifying records, Noel and Thomas, had their charges dropped by federal prosecutors in June 2021 after agreeing to participate in a deferred prosecution program. No one has been charged with any crime directly connected to Jeffrey Epstein's death. No correctional official has been disciplined beyond temporary reassignment. The MCC warden returned. The facility continued operating. In 2021, MCC New York was temporarily closed, not because of Epstein's death, but because of a separate series of operational failures. It has since been reopened. The sealed documents. For years after Epstein's death, enormous volumes of court documents related to the civil case brought by victim Virginia Giuffre against Ghislaine Maxwell remained under court seal. They were released in batches beginning in 2024. In the documents contained names, some expected, some not, of individuals mentioned in the context of Epstein's network. Each release produced headlines. Each release also produced the same observation from investigators and journalists who had followed the case from the beginning. The full picture of who knew what, who participated in what, and who benefited from what remains incomplete. What is documented and established beyond dispute is this: Jeffrey Epstein was arrested with enough evidence to go to trial. A trial would have been public. Testimony would have been under oath. Documents would have been entered into evidence. Names would have been spoken aloud in a federal courtroom. He died before any of that happened. Every individual whose name would have appeared in those proceedings has continued their life without facing that courtroom. Whether that outcome was the result of 2 sleeping guards and 2 broken cameras, or something more deliberate, is a question the official record has not answered. The Metropolitan Correctional Center sits in Lower Manhattan at 150 Park Row, a gray brutalist tower that processes hundreds of federal inmates every year. On most days, it is invisible to the people walking past it. On August 10th, 2019, it became the location of either the most consequential security failure in federal detention history, or something the system has spent every day since working very hard to make sure is never fully understood. Now, if real stories like this one matter to you, stories the system would rather you forgot, subscribe right now. Every week we go deeper. Every story is documented, and the next one is just as important as this one. Jeffrey Epstein's victims spent years fighting to be heard, to be believed, and to see the man who abused them face a full public trial. They did not get that trial. What they got instead was a death ruling that half the country does not believe, a set of broken cameras, 2 guards who were never convicted, and a sealed archive of documents that is still being released years later, page by page, name by name, into a world that is still deciding what to do with the truth.